I think I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome everybody back to the International Development Studies Speaker Series 2013-2014. It's been a little bit of time since we last met, and actually we're going to have a really great start to the year this year with Roberta's talk today, and Tony Winston on February 7th is going to be launching his book, The Industrial Diet. So we're looking forward to the next two talks. And Roberta, in case anybody is unaware, focuses on in four broad areas of research: consumption as development, how far can we care, nature and the politics of climate change, and gender and the environment. She's been published all over the place since she's come to Guelph. Exciting students in 2500 this year, the second year International Development Studies course that's required. So without further ado, today Roberta's going to talk about virtual geographies of international development, slacktivism, or caring at a distance. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Adam, for the intro and for all your organizing. Thanks to the advertising committee for putting a huge picture of my face everywhere that I look. That's really great. I love seeing that, yeah. So as Adam said, my name is Roberta Hawkins. It's nice to see some familiar faces here, some newer faces. I'm really happy to be able to tell you a little bit about my research today and get your feedback on it. I'm looking forward to it. So what I plan to do today is tell you a little bit about my research to date for those of you who are unfamiliar with what I've been up to, and then focus on a case study for analysis, which is called Join My Village. It's an online engagement campaign, and I'll tell you more about what that means in a minute. And I'll look at it in terms of two kinds of approaches. One is the idea of slacktivism, and the other is the idea of caring at a distance. And it's this new case study, this new analysis, and the conclusions that I'm making around it that are quite recent in my thinking, and that I'm really looking forward to getting some feedback on. I am sure that they can use some collaborative kind of brainstorming. So keep that in mind, and I'm really happy to hear from you about that as we go on. So, about 5 years ago, I was in the midst of thinking about feminist theory, political ecology, critical development studies, North-South relations, and in doing this, I happened upon, of all things, a TV commercial. In the commercial, these three women were holding these three babies and walking along a city street. They approached this woman and they thanked her for saving the lives of their babies, silently. Meanwhile, there was a voiceover, who I later found out was Salma Hayek, the actress, and she said, "When you buy specially marked Pampers, you can help the world's babies in need, because one pack of Pampers equals one life-saving vaccine. Together, we can help give babies a brighter tomorrow." And so it was in that moment, watching that TV commercial at home, that I suddenly realized that I could save a life just by buying one brand of product over another. So simple. Once I realized that everyday consumption could be linked to development issues, I started to see it everywhere. And now that I've told you that, you're not going to be able to look away, and I apologize. Everywhere you go, you will see this now. So I found out I can build a well in Africa by buying bottled water. I can rescue the rainforest if I drink more orange juice. I can solve the AIDS crisis by buying an iPod. I can buy some shoes and someone else will get shoes. And I can even kiss away poverty by using more lipstick. So I was intrigued by this idea that development could come home, that it could be intimate, that it could be every day, that I could do something about this. And quite frankly, the idea was too seductive, but also too suspicious for me to look away from it. And so I started investigating. What I found out is that most people refer to these types of campaigns using the word cause-related marketing or cause marketing. And essentially all that means is that there's a partnership between a for-profit entity, like a corporation, a non-profit entity, like a non-governmental organization, and a consumer. And so people often say that this is a win-win-win scenario. So they say corporations can make money, they can encourage people to buy their products, but they can look good while they're doing that. NGOs can make money on the backs of corporate marketing dollars, which they usually don't have the dollars themselves for, and consumers like us can contribute to charity, even when we're not doing anything, even when we're just buying the things we normally buy, all of a sudden it's philanthropy. So you can see that this win-win-win scenario is really popular, and it's becoming more and more popular. All the way to last year, when 89% of Americans surveyed said that they would actually switch brands to contribute to one that had a cause connected to it. And so some people, Ritchie and Ponte in particular, are arguing that cause-related marketing is actually becoming a new frontier in development. So they say that individual consumption decisions become development interventions through these types of partnerships. And this reflects a trend within the development sector that's an emerging field of research that we could generally call new alliances and new actors in development. So often this involves kind of strange bedfellows of corporations, celebrities, public relations teams, advertising firms, NGOs, consumers, private donors, kind of the people you wouldn't normally suspect being involved in development. Before I go any further, I want to make a note here. It's something that often comes up when I give these kinds of talks in the question period, which is like, what do you think about that? Isn't this horrible? And so I kind of want to bracket that for a moment, and I want to emphasize that in looking at these new alliances, I'm not condoning them. I don't condone them. I'm not condoning them in any way. What I'm actually saying is that they're becoming more and more popular. They're becoming ubiquitous. We're seeing them everywhere. And it seems like development more and more is taking the form of these new alliances. And so I argue that we need to research them. We need to critically engage with them, whether or not we agree with how they're formed and what they do. So that's my take on it. I look forward to hearing your take on it, though, of course. So I had a couple of research interests, specifically to unveil the people, places, and networks of cause-related marketing as development, as I'm calling it. I mean these kind of new alliances that revolve around an international development theme of one sort or another. More generally, I wanted to look at everyday connections between people, places, and natures in the North and the South, how they've been constituted, and what this actually means in people's lives in real environments. And so I continue to use the theories that drew me to this in the first place: feminist theory, political ecology, and critical development studies. So I've been doing this for quite a while so far, and I've used a bunch of different methods to try and get at the information that I feel I need to be able to pursue these questions. One of them has been to catalog all of the initiatives I can find, both in 2009 and again in 2012, to figure out what's going on, what's really out there, how much money is moving around, who's involved. Those kinds of quite basic questions. I've also been able to do a bunch of in-depth interviews with representatives from NGOs, from corporations, from marketing firms, and they have proven to be extremely insightful and interesting. And finally, I've spent a lot of time doing document and discourse analysis on organizational reports, press releases, funding reports, documents, websites, media, and for this project I'm going to tell you about today, I focused on social media such as blog entries and Facebook posts. So I'd like now to briefly highlight a couple of my findings over the last few years. For some of you this might sound a bit repetitive, and then I'll move on to some newer questions and possibly findings. So I'll do this by talking about two things: fundraising and awareness raising. These are usually what people say are the most important thing for cause-related marketing when it comes to NGOs deciding to engage in it. So most of the NGOs I talked to said, you know, we need to diversify our revenue stream. It's not sufficient to rely on corporations alone or corporate philanthropic grants alone. It's not sufficient to rely on government alone. And it's definitely not sufficient to rely on individuals who, for example, might donate to the same organization every Christmas, and then one Christmas there's some sort of natural disaster in a new place and all of their money goes there instead. So NGOs were worried that this is a really risky funding model, and so diversifying is the best solution. So a lot of them engaged with corporations in a cause strategy for that reason. I wanted to find out what kind of money we are talking about. One of the things the catalog did was try and determine what donations are committed. When you look at, for example, a bottle of water you pick up at Starbucks, what does it say? So you can see here that it's kind of confusing. Some of these products say something like 5 cents will be donated each time you buy this bottle of water. So a specific dollar amount is stated. Some of them say a percentage of the purchase price is donated. So if you paid $4, you can estimate what the donation would be by using a calculator or your head. But some of them say a percentage of the profits will be donated, of which we have no clue what the profits on a bottle of water are, so we can't possibly calculate what the donation is. In some cases, a specific item, like a pair of shoes, is donated, and in a bunch of them it said a donation will be made. So a very kind of general statement. I would say, as a rule, overall, we're really talking about a couple of cents each time you buy something. So even though all of this looks very different, in most cases it's not. It's like 7 cents, 3 cents, etc. So I think actually what's more interesting than the amount of money that's being donated is where the money's going. One of my more interesting findings was that people reported that a lot of cause-related marketing money is restricted to certain causes. So instead of being able to be used for administrative causes or administrative costs, for example, transportation, employment, etc., it was actually restricted to certain programs. And the thing that I think is important here is that it's not just any old program. It's actually specific things that are more palatable to consumers. So for example, here we see water, we see health, we see disaster relief. We don't see reproductive rights, we don't see climate change, we don't see anything that would in any way be political that would turn consumers off buying a product. And this is not just my interpretation of the graph, but actually based on interviews in which people have told me this. So this is a real concern, and what I want to highlight is that as more and more funding of development NGOs goes through a cause-related marketing model, this actually matters more and more, because it means that some causes are funded and some aren't. Interestingly, it's not just some causes that are prioritized, but international development as a whole doesn't stand a very good chance when it comes to cause-related marketing. So this is a report put forward by a very credible and kind of well-known cause-related marketing research institute. And they're actually telling companies what they should prioritize. So they ask consumers, what do you want to see? And you can see that consumers, by and large, said, we want to see products that support first local causes, then national causes, then global causes. And so they're telling companies that have money to put into cause-related marketing to direct it locally. I'll return to this notion in a moment. Keep it in your minds. The next thing that I looked at was awareness raising, and interestingly, most NGOs, when I asked them why are you using cause-related marketing, they actually said we want to get our name out there. So in most cases they didn't say because we're making tons and tons of money, we're so rich. No, they just said, yeah, we make a little bit of money, but that box of chocolate, that brand of diapers, that water bottle is going to every grocery store. Everyone's going to see that. If we can get our logo on there, it's something we could not possibly afford without the corporation. So awareness raising for most people was the main reason to engage in cause marketing. However, my research in terms of discourse analysis showed that what awareness was being raised was very, very narrow. And really, there was an emphasis on providing sound bites, like this one, Lace Up, Save Lives, that give the consumer some sense of a campaign, but not much else. So it doesn't tell us why lives need saving, whose lives will be saved, how the lives will be saved, how us buying shoelaces, even if you can figure out that that's shoelaces, which might even be hard, would relate to this, how much money would go with the shoelaces to where, why, by who, none of that's there. So there was this real emphasis on sound bites, and a lot of people said things like this. It's hard for nonprofits to take their issues and make them into something that people can actually, in a way, consume. There was an idea that it wasn't just the product, the shoelaces, that needed to be marketed, but the cause. So, what I want to argue, or point your attention to at least, is that as cause-related marketing becomes more ubiquitous, and I'm arguing that it is everywhere, in every drugstore, in every grocery store, in every online ad you see, as it becomes more and more ubiquitous, this is more likely the way that people are going to encounter messages about development. And so if awareness is being raised through product promotions like this, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of awareness is that? What kinds of messages are those? How are people interpreting them? And what could they possibly mean, if anything? One of the things that myself and Amy Kipp, my trusted research assistant, have been doing lately is comparing some of the data we collected in 2009 to the data we collected in 2012. So we've identified quite a few themes that seem to be trends that are shifting even in this short 3-year window. I'm going to identify 2 of them here because they relate to the case that I'll talk about in a moment. So the first one is an increased individualization or personalization of development. So there seems to be more messages that say you can buy this thing and save a life. It's up to you. You can do it. There's also a chance for many consumers to buy something and actually direct where their donation will go. So you can pick between water, health, and disaster relief, for example, by plugging in something online, or even sometimes at the register by picking the cause yourself. Beyond that, there is a strong reliance on individual stories now in these discourses. And I would say these are both what we might expect, individual stories about beneficiaries and aid recipients, but there's also an interesting trend of stories about the founders of social enterprises like Tom's Shoes being prominent within these kinds of advertising discourses. So it's something to note. The other thing we found is that there seems to be an increase in online engagement of sorts as it works through cause-related marketing campaigns and these new alliance strategic partnerships. So let me give you 2 examples. This one is from Tropicana Rescue the Rainforest. And essentially what happens is you buy a carton of orange juice, and then you have to take that carton, go onto this website, and register the UPC code or something from the carton to show that you bought it. And you can kind of keep track of how many points you have and how many square feet of rainforest you've saved, to the extent that you can actually plug it in and see it on Google Earth under your name as rainforest that you have personally saved by drinking orange juice. Another example here is the Cadbury Bicycle Factory, in which you are asked to, with your mouse, grab one of those Cadbury products on the side, throw it through that gear thing, and each time you do that, a part of a bicycle will appear, and bicycles in real life will be built for Ghanaian cocoa farmers. There's no product that needs to be purchased for this, but of course we can see the intense brandification of this kind of game, although I, as an aside, would say this seems like an extremely boring game. Either way, nothing's bought, but there is a brand and there are products and you do something and somehow development happens, whatever that means. So this online engagement that I'm talking about has a kind of range between directly donating money online, being asked to do that, put in your credit card and do something like that. It can also involve you doing something online. Sometimes it's clicking on content, throwing a chocolate bar through a hoop, uploading a video of yourself is a very common one, and a third party will make a donation on your behalf. And I would say for the majority, those third parties are corporations or some sort of for-profit structure. There's also a big trend, which I'm sure you've seen if you have the internet, to click on something to show your support of it. Like us on Facebook is the most common form of this. So you go to your banking website and it asks you to like them on Facebook. This is what I'm talking about. There isn't really much evidence, and even people that I interviewed and asked about this said, pretty much, we don't really know why we're doing it. There's no evidence yet that it actually results in something like more banking being done, but everyone is racing to get more and more Facebook likes. And this race to get clicks, to get likes, is part of what I'm going to talk about today, and encourage us to ask questions about. So it seems like these online technologies provide a lot of areas for question, and they also might provide some areas of opportunity. Because they're online technologies that are largely global and that allow for content development, we could consider that they might be able to make connections across distances between people. The other thing we might be able to consider is that it is possible that there could be opportunities for more complex awareness raising. If you're already inside the bicycle factory throwing chocolate bars through a hoop, you might learn more, perhaps, about chocolate farming than if you just read something that said buy a chocolate bar, save a life when you're at the store. So it's possible that there are opportunities here. But of course, as we start to think about these sorts of online actions, a very obvious question, an important question emerges, which is, what does all of this online clicking lead to, if anything, beyond the virtual world of the internet? So this is where the term Slacktivism comes in. Sometimes people call this clicktivism, you might have heard of because of the obsessive clicking nature of it, I suppose. So Slacktivism is a somewhat derogatory term, I would say, and it defines political activities that have no impact on real-life political outcomes, but only serve to increase the feel-good factor of the participants. In international development circles, we have actually quite a good case study through which a lot of these debates have been going on. And that's the Coney 2012 video made by the group Invisible Children. This video was widely critiqued as being nothing more than a marketing ploy with no real political impact. And one commentator remarked a year later, "It's been about a year since just about everyone in the developed world attempted to take down Ugandan warlord Joseph Kony by watching a YouTube video." On the other hand, though, sociologist Zeynep Tufekci sees more value in online engagement, and she argues that engaging in online content isn't at all about slacking activists, but she says it's actually a form of symbolic action, where politics creep into people's everyday lives, and the professionalization of cause advocacy is unraveled. As in, suddenly, everyone has access to these kinds of debates and content. And in fact, when it comes to that Coney 2012 video, she emphasizes the fact that conversations about things like white savior complex suddenly became part of our everyday conversations, and this opened up debates about development, privilege, global power dynamics, really in mainstream media, which weren't there before. These debates have circulated through a lot of different areas of international development. So here is a couple of images from UNICEF Sweden. They have a campaign called Likes Don't Save Lives, Money Does. And the bottom one here is an image, I encourage you to look it up online, of a freeze frame of a commercial. And so there's a series of commercials with this guy, and essentially he goes around trying to buy a sweater or half of a restaurant check in likes, only to find out that it doesn't really have any monetary value and it's worth nothing. Similarly, here's another campaign, Like Us and We'll Vaccinate 0 children. Nothing against Facebook followers, but vaccines cost money. Conversely, though, the World Food Program launched this ad in response. "You will not feed this hungry child by liking the World Food Program on Facebook, but our partner Royal DSM will." As in, if you like the World Food Program on Facebook, their corporate sponsor will donate some money. So this third party involved in this kind of online engagement is representative of the case that I'm going to analyze now, called Join My Village. So Join My Village is, again, a new alliance. It's a strategic partnership between the development organization CARE, largely based out of the USA, but it works in all different CARE organizations in different countries, and 2 corporations, General Mills and Merck. And Merck is also known as MSD. It's a pharmaceutical company. You might have heard of it under that name. So the aim of Join My Village is to fight global poverty, focusing on girls and women. It's an online campaign that follows what they call a click-to-connect or click-to-commit type model. So what they mean is each time someone clicks on some online content that Join My Village produces, one of these corporate partners will donate money, usually it's $1, specifically to care programs in Malawi and in India that focus on girls and women. So in most cases, as I said, $1 is donated each time an audience member, which is what I'll call anyone clicking on Join My Village content, each time an audience member clicks. And since 2009, when the initiative started, it's already raised over $4 million. According to the initiative, this is a new approach to global poverty. It channels the power of online communities to help real communities in Malawi and India create lasting change. By breaking down barriers of culture and geography, Join My Village strengthens the bonds that unite women everywhere. As the CEO of Care USA explained, the initiative is uniquely positioned to harness the power of consumer participation and change the way people support the fight against global poverty. So largely, Join My Village produces content in two forms. They write a blog and they have a Facebook page. Here's an example of a couple of the blog posts that they have. They have employed media officers in Malawi and in India to write these blog posts, send them back to a kind of central console, and through the Join My Village website and through the Facebook page, they share these blogs with everyone. So each time we read a blog, each time we click on a photo, and each time we watch a video that's connected to the blog, $1 is donated. Similarly, here's a screenshot of their Facebook page. Each time we like the page, $1 is donated. We can become a fan of the page and follow it in our own news feeds on Facebook. And a lot of the content is overlapping from the Join My Village website to the blogs to the Facebook page. So I've been analyzing for the last few months the content and the structure of the blogs and the Facebook posts. What I want to highlight is that Join My Village is framed to audience members as an opportunity for us to care. It's an opportunity to create a friendship and care about distant others. The word friendship is often used, especially the word friendship triangle between audience members, beneficiaries, and the intermediary kind of media people. And I want to kind of highlight here that the possibility of caring about people that are distant from you is continually a challenge that's taken up in development studies. So I would say practically, we've seen this a little bit already, it's more and more difficult for partnerships, especially in cause-related marketing, to raise money when they're focused on global rather than local causes. There's a sense that people don't care as much about what happens farther away than what happens close to them. And as well, it's difficult to raise awareness about really complicated, distant issues with these kinds of sound bites that are often used. Perhaps a little bit more interesting is the theoretical and philosophical debates about caring at a distance. So these really focus on how you might live an ethical life. And it's generally, philosophically, agreed upon that we couldn't possibly care the same amount about everybody in the world, or we would pretty much be overcome, distraught, remorseful, and wouldn't be able to function. So it's generally accepted that it is more reasonable to care about the people that are closest to you than the people farthest away. For example, you might care more if your own child was starving, then perhaps a neighbor's child, then perhaps a child in your community, and then perhaps a child that you haven't met. And many people argue that this is just a reasonable response to the kind of ethical dilemmas that we face in our globalized, growing world. So geographers have waded into the moral debates focusing on their spatial dimensions, asking questions like, how far can we care? How far should we care? Particular attention has been on the need or the emphasis of caring for distant strangers. And this is really what's focused on in a lot of international development campaigns and programs. So because Join My Village seeks to forge connections across distance and encourage caring, I wanted to take a closer look at how these things are discussed in the literature. So geographers and other people that are interested in this spatial aspect of care have essentially said that this challenge of caring at a distance could be alleviated through three possible approaches that one might use to extend the scope of care, to allow you to start to care for distant strangers. So the first one I'll call expanding the category as. And this draws largely on feminist theorists who argue that first we have to learn to care about ourselves and then the others that are closest to us. And then we have to recognize the similarities between the others that are closest to us and others that are far away. So if you see someone far away suffering, you imagine what it felt like for you to suffer or for someone very close to you and your family to suffer. And through that imagining, through that similarity, you start to develop care for people and issues that are distant to you. So when I say expanding the category us, I mean instead of us versus them, the us just becomes wider and wider and wider. The second approach focuses more on material flows around the world. So this is really about the flow of resources through commodity chains and global systems. And it argues that our everyday actions are already interconnected to distant places and people. So for example, our morning cup of coffee probably came from somewhere else, perhaps from a farming family in Peru. And because of that, there's no reason to assume that our moral responsibilities would end in our own community because we are already engaged with communities elsewhere. And so therefore, our moral responsibilities should as well follow these kinds of material flows around the world. So this is what fair trade coffee is about. This is what they're talking about, maybe in simpler language. The final approach is more complicated. And it draws on Doreen Massey's work in responsibility that is relational. And in some ways it combines the kind of similarity symbolism of the first approach and the more causal material connections of the second one. So she says that she builds on the idea that identities are constituted in relation to one another, to others, and she makes the same argument for places. And so she encourages a kind of outward lookingness, a reflection on how the place that we occupy affects other places through migration, trade, investment, aid, and how this dictates a responsibility that extends beyond the place that you are in. And post-colonial scholars have extended this idea to include temporal aspects of these interconnections, arguing that this responsibility shouldn't be based just on spatial connections, but on historic connections of exploitation and on contemporary inequalities as well. All three of these approaches have included discussions on what care means. And in general, in many of them, there's this distinction between two things, caring about and caring for. Caring for usually refers to the actual work of caring for someone, like feeding or clothing another human being. Caring about, on the other hand, usually refers to feelings, a sentiment, a sense of concern for the other. And in general, I would say this literature there has a real preference for caring for over caring about. And we can see that this relates to those previous things I was saying about slacktivism versus politics or activism. So keeping all this in mind, I wanted to figure out what the caring at a distance approaches could tell us about the Join My Village case and these new alliances in development more generally. But I also wanted to figure out how that case can help us think through those complicated theories and ideas about caring at a distance. So the first thing I did was look for some examples of these theories inside the case study. The category extending the category as, or the approach extending the category as, was actually quite easy to find within the blog and Facebook posts. So overall, there was some use of universal categories. For example, one of the blog posts starts, "Parents anywhere in the world are parents. Their love and their worries for their children are the same everywhere." So you can see that the author is trying to extend that idea of similarity, that parents are parents. There's no difference between here and there. As well, there was a real focus within both the Facebook and blog content on everyday life. So there were pictures like this one at the top that described what a typical market day was like in a particular village. There were pictures that followed one girl around showing all of the chores she did before she went to school and what she did at school. And Perhaps this is an attempt to try and make what might seem strange seem more familiar when you start to see these more mundane pictures about what's going on in people's lives every day. The final thing that happened was that there was a real emphasis on individuals. So Alice Makanda is an example here. This is her picture at the bottom. And she is featured over and over again in a series of blogs that follow her for about 5 years. These blogs tell the story of her life every time they check in with her, and I want to point out that they are not necessarily all positive. So this isn't a kind of great grand narrative of Alice's life becoming awesome, but there's all kinds of setbacks. For example, she gets expelled from school, and one of the blogs follows that and why it happened. So when I think about this, I would say that there seems to be a more complex representation of the lives of beneficiaries through this kind of online content. And the good thing is, they're, for the most part, not stuck in time or universalized. For the most part, these stories are more complex. We can see people and people's lives evolving over time. So this is a far cry from more traditional representations of development and a far cry from those sound bites that I was talking about earlier. These are personalized stories of everyday experiences, and when I interviewed Join My Village spokespeople, they said this was on purpose. So one of them said, "It's not just a mass of humanity out there somewhere who are suffering, it's that these are real people, and we're trying to provide that glimpse and that feeling of, wow, this person's life is so different and yet not really. You know, like they want to go to school and they want to start a business, and these are things that I want to do too." And really feeling that shared link is very important. So despite these kinds of positive conclusions that I'm purporting here, I want to emphasize that there are important questions that we still need to ask about these types of online campaigns when it comes to voice. So following many feminist and post-colonial development theorists, we need to ask questions such as who is representing who, for what purpose, under what conditions, under what power dynamics, etc. Moving on to the second approach, causal connections, this approach was much more difficult to find than the more similarity expanding the category as approach. What I did find was that there was a theme within a lot of the content that looked at tobacco farming in Malawi and the role that it played in community life and development. So as we can see with these two quotes here, tobacco production is blamed for being economically risky, and it's connected to gender inequalities, such as girls missing out on school and domestic violence. So this kind of information may manage to explain causal links between the economy and gender, giving a more complex understanding of how gender inequality and patriarchy is caused and perpetuated within communities and within families. However, this type of explanation doesn't take the opportunity to make those causal connections more broadly. So for example, it doesn't delve into how the reliance on tobacco production since what it calls time immemorial is linked to colonialism, or how global connections of trade and resource flows may play into the situation in the past or present of people living in this particular village farming tobacco. The one material connection that was so easy to identify, and in fact the only connection ever made between the North and the South, or the audience and the beneficiaries, was the connection of aid. So this is an extremely common post from the Facebook page. Today's challenge, 1,875 likes can provide 75 reference materials. 4,000 likes can provide 160 reference materials to classrooms. This connection is a straight calculation between how many likes equals how many dollars. So $4,000 can provide 160 reference books for a classroom. So this is a real quantification of aid. It's a real focus on tangible objects of aid. You notice they're not counting number of girls educated, number of teachers educated, amount of time lobbying government for different schools, anything like that. It's really, really tangible. It's object focused. And this kind of trend is something I've noted in my research so far, and lots of people have spent time criticizing it as being a very narrow concept of development. But I think one thing in this particular case that's more worrying than this quantification and tangibility of aid is the kind of urgency that goes along with these types of requests. So, because you can put comments underneath posts like this on Facebook, here's a series of comments that happened underneath this post. A Facebook fan, whose name I've reduced here, says, "Did we make it happen?" And the Join My Village media person writes back, "We're 135 clicks away from reaching this goal. Can you tell 5 friends to like our page today and like this post?" And the fan says, "I'm on it." And I don't know about you, but I can imagine her being worried, being frustrated, frantically messaging her friends and neighbors to share this post and to like this post. And so overall then, I think that highlighting these causal connections with this sense of urgency of aid being the connection between audience members and beneficiaries is something that we really need to pay attention to, because these audience members are learning at least more complex versions of the lives of people, of poverty and inequality, yet they are being asked to click now, and to get friends to click. And I'll take this idea up and again in a moment. So relational responsibility, because of its theoretical complexity, not very many people have been able to actually pin down case studies or examples where this might be occurring. And so because of this, I've decided to focus on a couple of aspects of it. One of them is the aspect of inequality and injustice, and the other one is privilege. And so I was able to find a few examples which we might call the approach of relational responsibility within the content. So for example, there were a lot of cases where blog entries offered some sort of comparison between the lives of Join My Village audience members, of course the presumed lives, and the Join My Village beneficiaries. So often this related to the kind of food that people ate, the kind of incomes people had, the kinds of decisions they made around frivolous spending or their daily lives. And as well, there were many cases in which blog and Facebook authors asked the audience member to imagine placing themselves in a similar position to the women or the girls that they were reading about, drawing on notions perhaps of geographic luck and unequal power dynamics between countries. So if we compare these kinds of statements to simple sound bites, like lace up, save lives, we can see that they're offering the audience notions that are way more complex than simply click on this and save lives, or buy lives and buy this and save lives. So this includes the opportunity to recognize that we're part of a wider system of injustice and inequality, and the chance to reflect on privilege and inequality across spaces, histories, and context. And these opportunities may well engender in the audience member a feeling of relational responsibility, or a new and different take on the world, or perhaps a new relationship that they feel to distant others. But the main problem that I'm grappling with still in analyzing this aspect of the case is that it seems as though even with these unique opportunities to think differently about the world, the only action that people are being asked to take is to click. So of course this brings us to the question, what does all of this lead to? And I think it would be fair to argue, and some of us might, that Join My Village is a simple case of slacktivism. Really, when it comes down to it, it's all about individuals clicking something on their computer, on their iPad, on their phone, and leaving it at that. There's also a real emphasis on the quantification and tangible object type of aid that many people are concerned with. More nuanced form of development in terms of empowerment or participation, it's not part of the conversation, at least here. And finally, the fact that all of this originates from these new alliances and strategic partnerships meant to promote the brands of General Mills and Merck, I think is something that we really need to pay attention to. And the question is, of course, if you click on these things, if you are implicitly giving your acceptance to those corporate partners, or even to the fact that there are these types of strategic alliances in the first place. On the other hand, one might argue that Join My Village is something more than just slacktivism. So first, we can point to the fact that visiting the Join My Village website, and in particular receiving updates from Join My Village through your Facebook feed, along with pictures of your friends at a party on the weekend, your aunt's new baby, and some jokes about work, that's different. That's encountering the other every day in your own intimate life, and I think that that matters. I think the tenor of where these messages are received really matters. The other thing we can point to is that most of this is taking place on social media, meaning that we can provide content, not just passively accept content. And so there's room here for dialogue and debate, and there are examples of this. So underneath the 4,000 likes equals 160 books, there are examples of people writing back and saying, what are you doing? This is sick. This is degrading to the lives of these women. Why would you put this on Facebook? And actually getting into debates with the Join My Village media officer who's running the site. Similarly, there's talk of these corporate partners, both on the Join My Village Facebook site and on their own. Corporations have kind of like cause corporate sites, so they're kind of CSR type sites. On both of these places, there's all kinds of debate about the corporations. So for example, whether General Mills should stop using GMOs in its Cheerios, which is a brand that it owns. There's people that are upset about layoffs at these companies and put it on the Join My Village Facebook site. And I think that that matters. That's different than just passively accepting content. Something else could potentially happen. The other thing is that I think Terfecchi's ideas on symbolic and political action being something different really matter here. So as an example, when I was interviewing the Join My Village people, I said, so what do you want audiences to do with all of this information? And they said, we want them to take action. And then I said, can you define take action? And they said, we want them to believe in it and think it's important. And I highlight that, indicating that maybe we need to reconsider what we mean by action, what we mean by politics. So I would say that this pushes us to reconsider our need to categorize things as either political or not, slacktivist or activist. And I think this also asks us to question our theoretical tools that we have to analyze and explore these kinds of new alliances. So first, I think that the Join My Village case pushes us to ask more critically, what do we mean by distance, by caring at a distance? What do we mean by proximity? I would say that in this case, physical distance seems far less important than it used to. This is due to technology and globalization, obviously people being able to connect largely anytime, anywhere. And as well, the kind of everydayness of these encounters, the infiltration of these messages into our own everyday intimate life, I think matters. Distance is not the same as what we might have imagined it to be in the past. So I think maybe we need to engage with more complex versions of space and place here. And many geographers are already doing things like this, drawing on Massey's Relational Responsibility and other post-colonial and feminist works that see spaces as already always interdependent and simultaneously both intimate and global. The other thing that I think this case pushes us to do is to reconsider what we mean by the North and the South. So when CARE did an analysis of its main donors, who they should target with Join My Village and their other cause campaigns, they got, similar to other companies might, demographic information through marketing tests. And what they found is that it was women in the US that were about 40 years old. However, since Join My Village started, the demographic that's consuming the information has changed dramatically. So this is some Facebook statistics from last year, from this year, that show that 70% of the 345,000 fans on Facebook, on the Facebook page, are from India. Not from the US, not 40-year-old women. In fact, I found out through my interviews that they're young men. And we can see that the US only accounts for about 18% of Facebook fans. So this drastically changes what we mean by audience and beneficiaries when we're talking about awareness raising and online engagement. And I think it blows out of the water any concept of North and South that we might have been using before this. Similarly, I think that the Join My Village case urges us to consider what we mean by caring in our theoretical approaches. So when it comes to development, the notion of caring about, as in having a sentiment towards someone, or caring for, care work, seems actually quite outdated and uncritical. It's particularly challenging to figure out how and where donations would fit into this, donations given to a development organization to do care work by someone who cares about, but not even because they're given by a third party, which is a corporate strategic actor. And so I think this shows that these ideas are up for questioning. The idea that caring for is preferred within caring at a distance discourses is also questionable, because that would seem that the only thing that would be worth doing then in international development studies would be on-the-ground interventions. But of course, it's these kinds of amateurist interventions that have been the subject of all kinds of debate within development studies. And beyond that, if we actually went somewhere, then we would be in place and no longer at a distance anyway. So I think there's a real disconnect here between what we mean by distance and what we mean by care. Recently, some geographers and others have moved away from thinking about specific acts of care and started to talk about the word care as actually referring to existing in relation to others, or a way of relating to others that we share a world with. And so J.K. Gibson Graham, as an example, offers some suggestions in this manner, and they call this a feminist ethic of belonging. And I think that this care as a way of relating to others might be a way that we can move forward and leave these kinds of either caring for or caring about debates well behind us. So overall, I'm excited that the Join My Village case has allowed me to start to question these caring at a distance theories in quite significant and I hope productive ways. And I'll remind you of a couple of my main points as I conclude. So first, what I'm arguing is that new alliances in development, for example, between corporations, NGOs, and consumers, are increasing in popularity. They're proliferating in terms of their messages being ubiquitous, of the way in which organizations get funding, and they're increasingly common routes that we are told we can use to engage in development issues. Because of this, I think that people that are interested in international development need to engage with these new alliances critically and need to ask questions of them rather than dismiss them as something that isn't necessarily good. What I'm saying is they're here and they're getting bigger anyway, whether you like it or not. As well, online awareness raising in particular and its attempts to connect people across places and across distance need to be held up to scrutiny. And I think that it's actually a bit of a cop-out to say that they are either slacktivist or political, and I think that we can do better when it comes to that. I've argued that our current theories on what counts as political action and how far one can care offer some interesting insights into analyzing this type of case and these types of new alliances in general. But at the same time, I'm arguing that this case study illustrates the need for new and innovative critical approaches in understanding the complexities of how these new alliances work and how they fit into the practices and processes of international development. And so I conclude here that there are some exciting opportunities to try and look into this more and to ask further questions about this. And on that note, I look forward to talking about this with you, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Yep.
Thanks, Roberta, for your excellent presentation. First, I want to commend your work on this. I was particularly interested in listening to some of these nuances and qualities I think about 5 minutes later and by the meeting, just to make sure that I did this talk. My question related to that, the comment I would make is, first, ethical considerations in terms of ethics. How appropriate are some of these practices? These organizations are proliferating here and there. It's not just save a life, and then you put a picture of a child from Indonesia or Africa or Latin America, and say, just to appeal to people. And also this, I have my views about this adopt a child in the team. You take a child in and then you pay this amount. Some do work, but I'm a bit skeptical about the aspects of how practical these things are. But essentially the issue is the portrayal, and I'm glad that you're looking at the discourse itself. The way these things assume a way of appealing to people in the distance, to say, let's do this, let's do that. And at the end of the day, a lot of money is made by this organizations claiming to be NGOs. I like the fact that some NGOs kind of declare the fact that, look, we're NGO doesn't mean we're not non-profit. Because that's also one of the myths that once you say you're an NGO, that means you're not making profit. You have to make profit. You have staff, you have all these guys you have to pay, you have operational costs. Let it be know how much money you take away from the money you get and how much you give away. The related question to that is my second question, which has to do with the second point of conclusion, which is scrutiny. And this has to do with governance issues. This organization seems to be out of control. Is there, or are there organizations, whether government or non-government, that are monitoring all these other agencies all around the place? For instance, we have organizations in Canada dedicated to say, look, if you say I should click this, anytime you post an advert, that go click this thing. What's your name? Where are you registered? What's going on? Somebody needs to be made accountable for this.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of things here around good questions around ethics, what's actually happening. I would say that similar to my finding where it was hard to tell how much money was being donated each time you bought a product, that's also an issue of ethics, and we could call it transparency in terms of advertising. We could apply the same kinds of questions here. Actually, recently in the United States, they're trying to pass a kind of guidelines that any cause-related marketing would have to follow, where you can't say like a donation will be made, you can't say a percentage of the profit without listing the profit, and you have to be much more specific. The ironic thing is that that specificity is in some ways limiting what NGOs can do, because it will say like it's going specifically to this one village in Africa, and then if they want to spend the money on something else, they can't. So it's an interesting kind of double-edged sword there. I would say that in this particular case, the organization, and actually in many cases that I've studied, they always argue that the development work that they do on the ground is separated from this stuff, which they call marketing. So they argue it is possible that our Malawi and India programs are more robust now because we have more money for them, but the work that we were doing in Malawi and India we were doing before, and maybe we have a bit more money. On top of that work is this whole marketing mechanism. And there are a lot of questions to be asked about ethics when it comes to that. I did ask these people about it, and they claim to follow ethics protocol similar to the one we have at the university, where people have to sign away their rights for photos and their stories to be shared online. I wonder how much understanding you have of how your stories are shared online. However, interestingly, there's also information that I didn't have time to get to where the people that have, the media officers that have made the stories actually take the stories back, show them to the girls, and then videotape them watching the stories that they made. So there's kind of this weird cyclical thing happening. And occasionally they'll even videotape them hearing messages from the audience. So if someone types something on Facebook, they'll make a video of the media officer reading that to a girl in Malawi. So it's possible that ethics can be followed. I would caution you, as people who probably have the internet, don't just click like on everything, because there's absolutely no guidelines for what that means. Kayla?
Is there research, or do companies do any consumer research about how, if there's like a life cycle to how long somebody, one individual or a group or an audience can, I don't know, maintain supporting something through an online campaign, or whether there's a certain limit as to like how many an individual might want to support through, or whether there's kind of a bombardment of, like if you get oversaturated with requests to support causes by liking things, or whether people choose one thing and you click like and then you're done with that one thing and then you move on to it.
Right, that's a good question. I would be interested to hear some specific research about that. There's a couple of things happening in this case. This is one of the most long-term online engagement campaigns I've been able to find. Most of them are quite short-term, like during this month, if you click this one thing, everyone shares it on Facebook and then it goes away. This actually has a limit on it by the amount of money. So in some of the small print that I showed, it actually says General Mills will donate this to a maximum of this amount of money by May 1st, 2014. The campaign presumably could end then. So far, every year they've renewed the amount of money. And the other thing I would say is, because this relies a lot on Facebook and you have a news feed, I have them on my news feed, and every couple of days it's requesting something else. It's possible that every couple of days you would just continue to click that. There's a whole other aspect about how when you click something, someone can see that you like it, and the kind of personality that you're forming online is a very philanthropic person, for example. That's a whole other question I haven't gotten into. Adam?
Sure. This was a really great talk, Roberta. I really enjoyed it. And I think I've learned a lot about something that, I mean, I've tried to exit myself from a lot of advertising over the last 5 years, and no one can attest to this. So, and I'm not, subscribing to cable, so I might not see the ad that's linking Pampers to saving the world. But my question is about the linkages between this whole cause marketing assemblage, whatever term you want to use, and with initiatives that try to actually change process and production methods in the global south. So standards and codes that maybe a third party that's independent and accredited goes in to verify. So I'm looking here at this chocolate bar that we just, wrapper that we just ate here. Fair trade, so that's independent accredited third party certification. Organic, independent accredited third party. FSC wrapper, so that's for
Wow. Good job, guys. Way to pick your chocolate bars.
And I guess,
You see when you guys first told them.
apparently it's $4 too, but yeah, so, okay, so we've got this on the table, like how, I mean, you've got obviously small scale cooperatives and other businesses that are into changing how they're actually going about producing things and trading things. And how does that link up to this?
So on the whole, it's not very solidly linked. And I would say in most cases, if there is a link, it is a coincidence or a kind of one-off situation. So in many cases, especially, I'm finding especially the things that become more prominent and more mainstream, probably because of their marketing dollars. This is corporations that are not making very many changes along their commodity chain of whatever type. And in fact, in some of my interviews for my previous research, people actually said things like, we had to choose if we should go fair trade or cause marketing, because we couldn't afford to do both. And we decided to do cause marketing. So there are definite cases, especially I would say in social enterprises, which are smaller scale, usually invented with the idea of some sort of cause in mind, or some sort of social good. In those cases, it's more common that there's some sort of follow through with the actual products. The thing that really bugs me about cause marketing, and at the same time intrigues me so I can't look away, is that it is the most hypocritical, contradictory thing in most cases, where the actual product is extremely unsustainable and extremely poor for the environment, for social issues, etc.
Can I just follow up with, you're citing Richmond Conti here.
Yeah.
And Stefano was kind of a standard fair trade organic expert. And then he comes out with this book on cause marketing.
Yeah.
And the ultimate end of that argument that he gives with his co-author is something about we're better off with product red, for example, than we are with a bunch of dead people in Africa from HIV/AIDS. Even if we're not addressing all these PPMs, process and production methods over in China about how Foxconn pieced the iPod together that's red. Right?
Yeah.
So where do you come down on this? I mean, are we better off with the cause marketing?
I don't know. I never know how to answer that. Because quite frankly, I change my mind really often. Yeah, it's too much on either end. I think if you gave me a case, I could probably answer it. Sometimes I get myself really worked up and think that we would be better off with nothing, because one of the worries that I have is the prevalence and strength of the discourse, and I worry that no one is asking questions about it. And from what I'm seeing in the last 5 years, it's just getting stronger and stronger. And as a post-structuralist who thinks that discourse is really important, the stronger that gets, the more worried I get. So right now I'm feeling pretty negative. And I have talked with Stefano a lot about this. Yeah, so. I might say something different next week if anyone cares to ask me.
I had two questions. I know you got some information, demographic information about people who are likely to participate in Drumline Village. And I don't know if you have information about other initiatives who might be more likely to participate. But I was wondering if these people who participate, if they were not to spend time engaging in this activity, would they be engaging in other activities that would be beneficial? Because there are all these complex things going on, but it's like the most direct way that they may be diverting the resources towards something that may not be as effective.
Yeah.
The second question is about the firms that participate in these programs. Is there a specific type of firm that's more likely to participate? Like, is it possible that firms who have negative PR score are more likely to participate to get like positive?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, based on my research so far, that so before these kinds of things are started, there's all kinds of strategic planning between corporations and NGOs, sometimes separate, and even sometimes middle agencies, like marketing agencies, that think of the whole concept and then they just go out and find corporations and NGOs to do it. So all of that research, which I would classify in the kind of business management literature, that has a lot of information on types of consumers. So usually there's a type called millennials, which is pretty much students here that like this kind of engagement online. And so organizations that sell a product to millennials and NGOs that have a cause that millennials also like are the kinds of people that would use this. So it's not necessarily that they're deciding if online engagement is good or not, they're actually targeting specific audiences. What was the second? Oh, and I would also say that in terms of the first part of your question, whether or not people actually do something other than click, that's the entire Slacktivist activist debate. So a lot of people say, well, clicking just allows you to show what you care about politically, and you're doing that political stuff in other ways already. And other people have evidence that says, nope, you're just sitting at your computer clicking, and then you're going to go and buy some like super unsustainable thing on Amazon.com at the same time. And this is the debate, and research is showing both of those things. And I actually personally believe that these kinds of consumer research and behavior type studies, they're really hard to pin down, because if you think about even yourself, like why you do something, why you bought that thing at the grocery store yesterday instead of something else, you often don't even know. At least I don't even know. Maybe it looked good, maybe it was the packaging, maybe it was MSC certified but not fair trade, or fair trade as well, maybe it was cheaper, maybe it was on an end cap and not in the middle of the aisle. So I think the studies that try and tease that out are really complicated, and I'm not sure people even know how to respond to those kinds of questions. So it's a good question, and it's a complicated one. Jillian?
Do you know if there are debates and people talking and thinking about these things kind of like outside of academia? Because I know it's all well good for us to like sit here and talk about it and think about it now, but a lot of people maybe aren't even aware that there's like a rising trend or aren't thinking about it from the same critical perspective, or even knowing what like a discourse analysis is and thinking about that. So do you know if this is like kind of being critical, but it's moving beyond just research that's getting published in journals and books and stuff that not a lot of people do?
Yes, actually this whole Slacktivist activist debate is not from academia. So that's already happening outside of the ivory tower. And all of the quotes that I had up there, although one of them was from a sociologist, it was in the New York Times. It wasn't from an academic article that she wrote. And actually, it was the New York Times quoting her blog. So those kinds of debates are happening. And I would actually say that a lot of these concepts, like caring at a distance, are happening in business circles when people are trying to advertise things to other people. They're happening in NGOs when we say, how will we frame our cause? Should we focus on this? They're happening in companies when they're like, should I give my money to this or this? What do consumers think? So I actually think that it's just the phrases that I'm using that are academic, but I think the conversations are being had, maybe in probably hipper words than I have to offer you.
Do you know how much money Join My Village makes from like additional donations?
Yes, so good question. I didn't mention, due to time, not because I'm trying to hide something from you, that Join My Village does have an aspect to it where you can give a direct donation and the corporations will meet that donation. So you don't have to just click, you can give $5 and the corporations will meet that $5 or match that $5 and they'll be 10. The reason I didn't mention it is because even though it's there, it's extremely, extremely low. And when I interviewed all of these actors, they said that they purposefully didn't request additional donations. So the interesting thing about all of this is that they started Join My Village as an experiment. It's the first time that a corporate brand, General Mills, instead of a brand that we know like Cheerios, is being used in cause marketing. They started it for their own employees, and then it quickly grew to the US, and now we see India. And they had these kind of notions that later on they would do something. So when I talked to them about 4 years ago, they said, later on, we're gonna put a thing on Cheerios or some other brand that General Mills owns, and that will go to Join My Village. And then when I asked them about it this time, they said, oh no, we forgot about that, we didn't do it. It's all online now, nothing about buying stuff. And it's the same thing with the donations. They said, like, we have this open, and later on we might ask for donations, but so far they have very, very rarely. So it's like the lowest part of where their donations come from.
My follow-up to that is that they seem to make a very complicated argument for why we should like or click. Meanwhile, from personal experience, I've been on Join My Village and I just click and never read anything because I know that a like is $1, and so it seems to me like maybe there is an alternative reason for like explaining all of this, and I thought maybe it was because they get a lot of other donations as well.
Yeah, not other donations. I am curious to think about the switch to Facebook because it only happened in the last few years, if maybe people click faster. Because before you had to actually go onto the Join My Village website and watch a video, so maybe there's a different type of engagement happening. I don't know how to find that out though, but it's a good point. Anything else?
It's interesting to see to look into how traditional funding sources, say from corporate social responsibility, I guess personal donations, how that's changed as these other approaches, marketing approaches.
Yeah.
And I guess the question to be asked then would be: is aid money being taken from these more traditional sources and diverted towards these newer approaches?
Yeah, there isn't too much research on that yet. One thing does suggest, though, that corporate social responsibility is all around becoming much more strategic. So instead of giving money to a charity because the CEO of that company really liked that charity, it actually becomes about the meaning of the corporation and the products that they sell. So we can see even in the last 7 years a huge shift in where CSR is directed. So it's not just any local charity, but for example in Procter & Gamble they made an umbrella called Live, Learn and Thrive because they said all of our products are about cleaning and living, thriving. So we're only going to give money to education and women and children, nothing else. So they kind of made a strategic decision, and I would argue that CRM is nothing but strategic. So clearly it falls into strategic CSR. In terms of individuals, that's like really up in the air. A lot of people claim that they're really worried that if you buy toothpaste that's connected to a cause, you won't give money to that cause. That's a real worry because the toothpaste gives 5 cents and you might have given a whole $5. So it's actually a significant loss, but no one's been able to measure it yet. And all of these cause-related marketing studies, like the one I showed you about local, national, and global, they're all about what would you do? So would you switch brands to buy this? Would you still donate to a charity? Would you still volunteer? And everyone says yes. Any other questions?
I know this isn't your focus as much, but it seems obvious to me that cause-related marketing is propagating commodity fetishism. So what does that mean for the environment? Or for like things like fair trade, where fair trade is being ignored and the environmental sustainable practices are they being thrown away so that we can have this cause-related marketing?
I don't think they're being thrown away, but I think they're being masked. So I argue that the message of connecting goods to causes that make us feel good, like saving lives, really masks the kind of material aspects of the products that we might be buying. So I'd say overall, not a good sign for the environment. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate your attention and discussion, and I look forward to continuing it now, informally.